Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and today I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted. How you doing this fine and lovely evening, sir?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing so good. I'm ready to talk about creating epic boss battles for D&D, and I suppose other RPGs as well.
Yeah.
Thought about this topic, thought about this idea. It literally just came up for us recently. I know we talked about it a little bit. I feel like you had a whole campaign where we could just talk about, creating, more interesting combats, even if that wasn't exactly what you intended to do. It was like a
Sure.
side effect of that specific campaign. And it
Are
doesn't
you are you
always have
talking
to
about,
just be epic boss battles either.
like you don't have to make every fight in a game epic, because if you start doing that, everyone's going to then expect, like, well, how do you raise the bar? How do you raise the bar? And then it just becomes overwhelming and stressful. But there are definitely tips and tricks you can do to try and make fights memorable. And some of them are super easy, whether it's having cool like layer or regional effects take part in what's going on, whether it's things where the boss gets access to new moves round around, whether it be a change in their regular actions or their legendary actions, whether you bring in like waves of enemies throughout the different rounds to kind of like refill the numbers to still have lots of attacks going, but to show the fact that, all right, there's another objective here, so if I don't do this, there's always going to be more things to fight, and it just can keep going and going.
Like the trick to having interesting combats in D&D is there's this fine line between making it interesting and creating an even greater slog, right? Like
Sure.
and like that's always been a problem, like with your boss battles. um One of the solutions is just to give the boss more hit points, but then there's
Sure.
nothing interesting or particularly fun about that, right?
Right.
5e has gone a long way with adding lair actions and legendary actions to try and like deal with the problem of the action economy, right, which has always been skewed on the player side. How many times have we set up like what we think is going to be an amazing scenario encounter for the players, and it's like, well, you roll really poorly on initiative and your monster goes last, and maybe it gets to active once. Maybe, I mean, there's been times where
Yep.
literally nothing is, it got to do nothing.
Or like if the players do something really creative, or like you're really, really bad at a roll of a saving throw, and it greatly changes the scope of the battle. And not every monster is gonna have a legendary resistance. Sometimes it might, sometimes it won't. But you know, if they get a stun or a banishment or something along those lines, it's like, all right, fight can be over before it's even really started.
Yes, yes, it can. And also, like, I'm a big proponent of allowing that to happen. Like, I
Oh
don't
yeah.
like, maybe when I was a younger GM, I might do things to, you know, counter the players so that the monster stays in. But as I kind of matured as a GM and a storyteller, I realized that wasn't really a great solution. And sometimes
Sure.
you just got to, sometimes it's just better to give it to them and be like, okay, this didn't work out so great, but the players they're gonna have this cool moment they're gonna talk about, and it's gonna be cool for them, because they just like totally womped your monster, without your monster being able to do anything, even if the
Well,
GM spent hours working on that encounter.
and those moments do hurt, but with the demon that wound up getting banished, do you think anyone would still be talking about that particular fight if all it was a regular fight that we just fought a hard demon? I don't think so. you
No,
know
it's a crazy cool moments. So
the go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so like let's get into like the nitty gritty of like talking about making combats more interesting, boss combats or otherwise. I will say, like, Ted set up a whole campaign where this came up a lot, right? And it was the repercussions campaign, and the idea was there's all these like floating continents and islands, Well, it kind of like triggered some scenarios where us the players were always worried about falling off, because in the beginning of that game, our dungeon master said, "Hey, we're not just doing like 20 die 6 if you fall off. You're just dead. Like, you don't come back from this. You fell off the edge of the earth. You've gone too far. You've been eaten by the monsters. That's it." And then I want to point out something else, right? The way that the world kind of broke and we ended up with these floating islands was, these, I believe it was like meteors striking basically the world and physically breaking everything up, and combined with like chaos and far realm magic, and loaded with aberrations, right? And unleashed all these monsters as another part of the effect, right? But one of the cool things that Ted didn't do, was he didn't make those monsters that the kind of were like the catalyst to this problem we had to deal with any more resistant to it than we were, right? So it wasn't like they didn't have to worry about it. So it created a cool dynamic where in the combats when we were near these edges, we could try and use them to our benefit and try and knock the monsters off instead of fighting them. Now, granted, they could do the same to us, and like we had all kinds of solutions, everything from high magic to one of the characters taking always having a javelin with a 50-foot quill rope tied to it as his Hail Mary. Let me throw this and try and stick it into something. So just by that one feature, that one change in the world, uh, anytime we were adventuring near the edge, and it seemed to happen fairly often, um, you know, that was a consequence that we'd have to worry about dealing with, whether it was us falling off or like, can we like knock these monsters off and let them deal with insta death.
And to be fair, like there was definitely some, pushback of, all right, well, what do you mean? Like, how can you just say? And it's like, well, I'm sorry for the sake of this game, I am throwing this rule out. And maybe in other places, you can do the measurements and do whatever, but if you fall off of these floating continents, they are high enough up that no, there's no saving throw, there's no mitigation. You're falling far enough that you just dead. Like, sorry. And yeah, it was definitely fun to put the monsters out there because an aspect of interesting fights is to let the tactics of the game be useful. The number of spells that offer a pushback, or the number of like, all right, well, can I grapple and do a throw kind of maneuvery type things is like, all right, I'm gonna get that in there. Players were looking for items that offered a fly speed or some ways to teleport so that should there be some kind of issue that they can get back to safety. And I'm here for that. Uh, but if,
Is
if
there a
if
way
there
for me to
isn't that,
cast Featherfall 30 times in a row?
but I mean, if there isn't if there isn't that fear, that little like just you know crawl up the back of your spine or up the back of your neck to like keep you on your toes, then it's just another combat, and that's not what I was looking for.
So there was a game we actually played in that kind of makes me think of your game a little bit. When
Okay,
we went to Concoction and we played in a Pathfinder game, and the
that's that's pushing back quite a bit.
yeah. I think you'll remember once I started going, right. So
Sure.
it was a written adventure, and I think maybe was it Kobold Press. It might have been a Kobold Press adventure, and for Pathfinder. And the idea was there was these titanic creatures, right? These monsters that were basically like kaiju. But they were locked in like this temporal stasis where it wasn't that time was stopped, but it moved glacially slow. So so slow that goblins like sprung up and started building their goblin settlements on on their bodies, their still living bodies, and like things that they were building to were like chunks of flesh that were like not hacked off during the combat, and it was like all rope bridges. And I believe like we had to get like a MacGuffin, I think, right? And we were basically like throwing it back and forth, and like it was almost like a game of keep away with us trying to get this thing or them trying to keep it from us, with
Hmm.
the added problem of, oh, if you fall off the edge. I'm pretty sure Steven invoked that same rule as well, where if you fall off the edge you're just kind of dead because of the distance. Also, we might have been low enough level that even if we would have did rolling the damage, we would have been dead anyway.
Sure, that, I mean, that is definitely an aspect of the fall of, like, all right, well, if you're at a low enough level, that can be an issue. I mean, I ran a game just a couple of days ago where the party was level 2, and there were things there that are like, all right, well, I prefaced the beginning without knowing any of the story elements that were going on. I'm like, you know, be aware of what you're doing, because some things in this adventure, if you're if you're not thinking about what you're doing, death is possible. And that made them have to really think about what they were doing. And I can get into that interesting boss fight, later on if you want.
Yeah. So kind of going back to that adventure, but like, the things that were going on was, one, it wasn't just a straight up fight. It was us trying to get or keep a thing away from adversaries, right?
Hmm.
And there was enough of them that like you could kill them, but there were more, right? So that kind of wasn't enough. But also you had these rope bridges that we were dealing with. Some of the masses of monster chunk that were basically acting as land masses were close enough that you could run and jump onto. But if if you made a piss poor athletics check or jump check or whatever the check was in Pathfinder, it could be catastrophic, right? And in the same token, it also meant that you know you had more options than just like fighting and hacking at things. I hit it with my sword, or if you have spells like that have movement abilities, so then you have new ways to use them. It's interesting. Or instead of attacking a monster, maybe you attack the rope bridge that they're on, and you totally do like an Indiana Jones thing.
So related to spells, and I don't know how in depth I went last week when I was talking about uh, my final battle for D&D in a castle. The party had been warned about this one particular adversary, and I have a really cool mini that resembles Darth Vader, and he's got a wicked sword that has been painted to look like it's a like a flame tongue or a lightsaber, however you want to look at it. Um, so like from the beginning, when they started realizing, like, all right, this guy could be somebody we go up against, like half the party wound up fighting him with the party and their mounts, which are these riding drakes that are based off of the CR4 reduced threat wyvern. Uh, and the other half of the party is trying to essentially cure this other dragon, which is a massive shadow dragon. This is actually what I had used as my final boss, but it wasn't in any way, shape, or form something that they were trying to kill. They never actually did a single point of damage to this.
It's funny because
So
in
it
that
still went. Go ahead.
during that same period, I also used that as a mini boss.
Well, that's the great part about taking stuff with me to the castle, was it was useful for both of our tables. Um, But what I wound up doing was they had gotten yet another MacGuffin that they could pour spell energy through. And the idea was this thing would essentially be able to burn shadow, and it was trying to burn the shadow essence, the the curse, the corruption off of the spirit of this elder dragon that they, had a relationship with. Um, so once they burned off enough shadow, it was basically making saving throws. Uh, so the way it would work was they would make an attack roll, but they would get a bonus to their roll equal to uh, the spell slot being used minus one. So like if you're just using a regular one level one spell, you make a regular attack roll. If you're making a fifth level spell slot, you get your regular attack roll +4. If you hit, I'm now checking to see how many how much essential spell damage this thing is taking by like tabulating how many spell slots have been pumped into it. And then, like I said, then I'm making saving throws. And once I got to a certain threshold, then it was making saving throws at disadvantage. Uh, and they wound up pushing through, burning all of the spirit corruption, the shadowness off of it, pushing the spirit back into the gold dragon that I was using as its you know its proper body, and then in like pure 80s style. Once it actually got back around to the to my Death Knight or my, anti-paladin, whatever I was calling him, my Darth Vader stand-in, he basically took off. And he's like, "I'll be back," and shook his fist and fled because he wasn't the fight. That thing was. It's like it was a cool thing, and like the players were like left wanting because the villain who was behind it all gets away. They're happy that they saved the day and they got to do what needed to be done. But they all love the fact that it's like, well, there could be a further story, and if we were to all come back to the castle next time, that could be a kind of like a continuation moment of like, all right, now we track down this guy and you know put him
I
down for good.
I like having combats where there's multiple objectives that can be achieved during the combat, right?
Hmm.
Like our Forgotten Soldier product.
Hmm.
One of the main things to that is the encounter, but in the encounter there's an arcane device that hampers the players, right, and helps the enemies. But you have the ability as the players to try and take control of that arcane device, and you kind of works in stages. At first, it kind of hampers it, then you neutralize it, then you can actually use it for your side. So not only is the battle going on, but also players can be trying to take over this arcane device and utilize it to to help their side, right? Um, or if nothing else, at least so it's not buffing the enemies and attacking the players as well. So like I like things like that. Um, during the Scarlet Sisterhood game, one of the main things was they had to complete a ritual in the Feywild, um, in order to pull these hags, a covey of hags, out of the prime material plane, and kind of like weaken them. So one player was able to basically do the ritual while the others had to make sure that the ritual wasn't disrupted. And the ritual I turned also into kind of like a mini game or a mini fight,
Hmm.
that one of the players was dealing with, while the rest were not only were they just trying to keep the ritualist safe, but then they also had NPCs that were commanding at the same time. So they got to make like a leadership check, and depending on how well that did, determined like how well their side did at protecting the ritual, or if the rituals had to kind of deal with doing the ritual while also defending themselves from physical threats. So like in that instance, you have like two, three different things going on at the same time, in addition to combat, right? So it gives the players more options, more things to worry about, and and from the GM side, it's not just like, oh, here's another bag of hit points for you to whittle down to nothing. Like, here's some problems that you have to try and solve and figure out, and that is, I think that is like one of the key things. Obviously, having interesting terrain and sites for the encounters goes a long way as well. So there's more things that the players can interact with, which Ted really kind of excels at this, because He loves to put together terrain and use minis and scatter.
Well, it's an aspect of the game that, if you're playing theater of the mind, like someone can ask, "Oh, is something there?" But they have to have the wherewithal. I like putting stuff out there that could be a couple of different things. It could be something that someone like, "Oh, well, can I leap off of this, or can I hide behind it? Can I use this to accomplish XYZ?" Uh, I like having those things out there because I like having those who want to engage at, something tactically that it's there for. If you have a battle and you have, your objectives of whatever it is, and you have hazards to play with besides, then not only does that mean like, all right, if you're a player and you do something stupid, something can come up. Oh, but if you're a player and you do something smart and you push an enemy into the hazard, well, now now you're not having to worry about it and the enemy is. That's a win-win situation. So like those are the kind of things that I like to incorporate. I like you said, I like things that have layers. Um, but when you can get into the thinking that you have to use the layers, that's where it can be a lot of fun. I know you had a recent encounter within the last handful of months where like there were hellhounds, and I think you used something to like denote that there was lava in there. And it's like, all right, well, I know lava does a shit ton of damage.
Yeah,
So like, don't touch that stuff.
and yeah, there was one of the encounters you guys had, and there was lava flows going through the encounter area. In this particular case, though, there wasn't much the players could do to make it beneficial to them. The
Right.
Hellhounds were using the lava flows as cover or partial concealment. They're immune to fire, so it's no big deal. And I think I even tried dragging some of you into the lava. It didn't work out.
you
It
you
didn't
might
work
have. I
well.
don't remember. I don't remember the specifics, but most of that party is high strength, so I don't think that's gonna go over too well unless you come over to get some of our squishy spellcasters, and then you might see a misty step in use. So
You could always hope for that one. But like that's the other
so
thing too is like you can use the terrain to make complications for the players and have it so maybe it's not as effective against the enemies. Now, I would use that sparingly. You don't want to always just be like using it as a cudgel, and it
right.
also makes it far less interesting if every time you throw different types of terrain in there, but it's only a hindrance to the players.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun when you have to worry about it as well. Now, mind you, the thought pattern, in my opinion, is like, what kind of DM are you? Like, I know Dave and I are definitely, alike in some ways, but we differ in others. Uh, Dave, he throws out challenges. He hopes to challenge the party, but like he always rolls out in the open. And while he cares about the story, he does not care about your character. If he's totally Drago from Rocky. If he dies, he dies. And it's not to say anything bad about Dave as a DM. I, on the other hand, like I want your fights to be challenging. I want you to feel like your character's life is on the line. But I'm on the player's side. Like I want them to win. I want them to get out there, but I'm not going to make it easy for you. But like I told my players at D&D in the castle, I'm like, all right, death is certainly a possibility here, but because this was D&D in a castle, where like I want this to be a legendary experience for you. If something goes wrong and your characters die, like that's not going to be the end. Like we can find a way to bring them back. It might be a little bit of a challenge. It might be like a cool role playing scene, but I don't want you to feel like, all right, well, I did all of this and now I have to scrap this character and make a whole new one. Um, so like there's definitely different mindsets. So if you're on, the more aggressive side, like putting hazards that can harm your enemies or your monsters, that can be, kind of slightly problematic for you. But if you're in my camp, when you put things out there that the players can use to their advantage, like, and they figure it out without you, like, nudging them in that direction, that's like a celebratory moment of like, yay, they figured it out. This is great. So I like that.
It is a lot of fun to do that. And now, do you plan for those things, like those contingencies, or are you just going with whatever they throw out there?
No, I mean, if I put it out there and the players, like, I'm not gonna put it out there without there being like, let me stop, rewind. I'm not gonna create an encounter that requires them to figure out this is the only way to defeat the monster unless there has been like a couple layers of hints. They might not pick up on it, uh, and like in the heat of the battle, if they realize like, man, this fight is not going our way, what's going on, then I might give them the, oh, well, make an intelligence check, or make an investigation check as you're thinking about this, and like you rewind to those earlier clues. uh, but most of the time, if I have a bit of a hazard out there, it's it's something that's like, all right, well, they should be able to beat the monster. And if they use this hazard to their advantage, well, then it's going to make the encounter even easier for them.
Do you have a particular type of like go to when it comes to creating more interesting encounters for your players?
So my interesting thing, and D&D in the Castle will absolutely back this up, or the game that I ran at D&D in the Castle would back this up. I like doing things with the monsters or NPCs that is not a mechanic or not a thing that player characters have access to. Um, whether it be a spell and what have you. Like, they were on the deck of a pirate ship, and the pirate captain threw this bead of swirling black and purple energy that exploded for 8 die 6 necrotic damage. And as I described all of this, going on, and the characters and their mounts, like their flesh being like withered and dried from this, explosion, like the one player like was sitting straight across me. He's like, "What the hell is that?" Like, he's so used to playing games that were like only used raw that he had never seen somebody ever make up something new. And I'm like, well, welcome to my game, sir, because that's all I do. Or like whether you have a creative maneuver that, is, possibly inspired by, uh, things that the battle master can do. Uh, those things can be a lot of fun. Um, but if you just do things that players haven't seen before, they're gonna be remembered. Like the players are gonna like be talking to each other because when it's a surprise, that's literally nothing that you can plan for because you've never seen it before.
I'm a big fan. Like, I'm a big fan of like the the thing you have to do during the combat, right? Like, the combat
Hmm.
is the secondary thing. Like in D&D in a
Sure.
castle, I don't know if I probably talked about it a little bit last week, but like the end fight was they had to close the portal that Demogorgon was coming through. All the
Sure.
while where Demogorgon's trying to attack them. Now, could they have just straight up tried to fight Demogorgon? Sure, but as a 14th level party, I don't think they were going to defeat him.
Sure.
And also, they were getting had disintegration rays being fired at them every round, so it's, to add to the complication. And this party,
Sure.
while
Sure.
they were good at doing a lot of things, I don't think their strength was going to be in a straight up fight against a bruiser like Demogorgon, who's just
Yeah.
like a huge sack of hit points, has tons of immunities and resistances. Uh, but they were good at doing other things like passing skill checks because they had two artificers, right?
Right.
So it became
That's a
like
lot of flash of genius.
that is a lot of flash of genius. And really, like they were like they had the plan, like you know what they were going to do, and have contingencies to make sure they're able to shut the portal. So they were like plotting how they were going to use their flash of geniuses, and like kind of like the sequence of doing things, and trying to pick and choose what they were going to let go through and what they were going to try and stop, because they didn't want to waste a resource stopping something only to later on have it all undone because they used that resource too soon.
Oh yeah,
So for me, like, and also like the way, kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit, the way I run adventures is like I knew for the final battle they were gonna have to deal with Demogorgon trying to come through. There would be some kind of lair effect that would happen every round, and um, and they were gonna have to figure out how to shut the portal. I didn't actually make up like how that was gonna happen beforehand.
sure.
But then they came up with their own solution, which was to trap the soul of Demogorgon's main minion. And I was like, okay, well, then at that, it is exactly that instance that I was like, okay, this is how you shut the portal, right? There's these arcane sigils. It's going to take 2 rounds to scribe them, and then it's going to take a round to activate them, and you all have to activate it at the same time. And that was the other thing too, right? So on the final round, they had to all hold their initiative to the slowest initiative in order to do the activation. And
Right.
that was part of the plot. Like they had the 4 people that were on the pylons ready to do the thing, but then they had like a backup person that was like the floater, the monk, because the monk had enough speed to get wherever he needed to be in case one of them
Mhm.
went down before that happened.
Nice.
And I did almost disintegrate one of them. It was close. They're
So
like, I said, I've got 7 hit points left. I'm good.
that's a lot of fun to have the initiative aspect kind of be taking into account. Now we've crossed the halfway point, so I guess we're reminded that this live chat is powered by Easy Roller Dice. They've been a sponsor with us for a long time. Absolutely go check them out. They've recently dropped dragon scale dice. They look absolutely gorgeous. Uh, I'm hoping to get my hands on a set or all of them, whichever the case may be. So definitely go check them out. I know I'll be probably sometime later this week be doing some Facebook shares of the new dice. Um, but down in the description below you'll find a link to a promo code and a link to Easy Roller Dice. So if you want to go get yourself some awesome Dragon Scale metal dice at a discount, there's use that link. Go show
They
them
do
some
look
love.
fantastic. Are they metal?
I believe so. Uh, I spent some time looking at them, and I can't imagine at the price point that they're being offered that they're not metal.
Yeah, they're
Uh,
metal. But some of them
because
actually don't look metal
sure,
because they're so colorful.
but I absolutely and I like I said, I'm looking forward to seeing some in person to be able to add to my dice hoard and to use for cool characters. But I do have other admin duties to kind of showcase as well. They've recently mentioned our friends over at Kobold Press, and some things showed up towards Nerdarchy headquarters recently. So, Tome of Beasts 3 and the revised Tome of Beasts 1, the Pocket Edition. These are some cool and hefty books that are going to be going over to our giveaway shelf. Um, and then I will be talking about the revised Tome of Beasts, 1 on the website after I've had a chance to peruse all 400 plus pages of said thing. So I love the awesome monster manuals that they've been throwing out over the years, and all told between the 4 of them, it's it's what, over 1,200 pages.
It's a
So
lot
a
of pages of
lot of monsters.
monsters.
I know V from V Muse was at D&D in a castle, and she used a lot of kobold monsters to surprise and terrify her player characters. So a lot of great stuff to use, and you know, I think there's more kobold monsters than there are monsters on D&D Beyond. So with all those books to use as resources, you should definitely check them out.
Yeah,
Now,
it'll be nice when Demiplane gets all that stuff incorporated into it because I think they're doing a 5e third party.
mm,
Basically, it'll be like D&D Beyond, but for everybody else. Because for me, it is such a pain to use anything that isn't like on D&D Beyond. I
sure,
I will I will
definitely
make
understand
up
that.
monsters whole cloth on D&D Beyond before I go to a third party, just because I I like having it all there and using the
Sure.
encounter builder and everything. And I know that
I mean,
really limits my options because there's so many great things by so many companies.
yes. And like even if like you don't want to go down that road of like you want to make something up, 1,200 pages worth of monsters. There's a whole lot of amazing abilities that you can use as inspiration for building something else. So that's what I've done. Like I've used a lot of Kobold Press material over the years, but I've also used it as building blocks and inspiration to make some fun things for my home games. Uh, Now I will say, kind of coming back to um, our epic boss battles. Uh, I I was asked yet again to um, run a game for my son's scout troop. They recently were on at summer camp, and 2 years ago I was tasked with a near impossible mission. I ran a single session for like 15 to 17 kids. It was uh, an experience I'd rather not repeat. So when I was in England at the castle, I get this message of like, hey, everybody's going to be at summer camp in a couple of weeks. You would you mind coming and running another game? Like, I'm willing to do it, but I can't do it by myself. I need to bring in some more GMs. So, like, you tell me how many people are going to be there, and I'll make sure I've got enough GMs. So I wound up like reaching out and finding a couple people to come down with me. We brought down the maps, the minis, dice, the papers. Like I brought pre-gens. So I didn't want to make it too hard on players who some had never seen the game before. So I made it like second level. They're not one shotable for the most part, uh, but it'll be fun. So because we're in the heat of the summer, here in the United States, I decided I was going to run an Arctic adventure. And without getting into all the details, the session boss was essentially an ogre, though I was referring to him as a juvenile yeti, and he had kidnapped a a white dragon wormling, and it was literally like had a collar around its neck, staked into the mountain. Uh, so the players were warned in advance, like you can't just rush in blindly because you could just straight up die, and a white dragon's breath weapon does 5d8. Even at a challenge 2, it's enough to just straight up kill you if I roll high enough. And I didn't tell them that part, but I warned them about it being dangerous.
Yeah.
So I made sure that one of the characters at the table had proficiency in Arcana, so therefore they would know about what dragons were, and that this was not some little drake. That this was a legitimate. Even though white dragons are beasts, I tried to like ham it up a little bit. So they went in and did this. I left it open to them for tactics, but if they charged in, they were going to die because the white dragon was going to be on the ogre's side. Um, but they had the most mobile character charge into the fairly large cavern and like make a whole lot of noise and racket to draw the ogre over. Now the dragon was on a chain, so he could only move 10 feet, so he couldn't really do much, to get over to where the noise was coming from. So while the person is like dancing around the ogre, they're like, "We're gonna rush in and we're gonna make a." Essentially, they're going to try and persuade the dragon, like, look, if we let you go, you got to be on our side. And dragons speak Draconic. It had an intelligence of 5, and like I literally left it up to what they said. And they didn't know the story. There wasn't a lot of time to investigate the scene. But they're like, look, if you help us bring down the Yeti, the ogre, uh, we'll let you eat it. And that's exactly what he wanted. So I'm like, all right, instead of making this a disadvantage, they just got to make a straight roll. Nobody knew that there was going to be a disadvantage, but that was the trigger that turned it into you can make this happen. They rolled really well. Took like a round or two to actually get the dragon free from the chains. Um, but it wound up being a cool fight of like the player characters and this white dragon fighting on this ogre, and it was a lot of fun to not to see them like working tactically, working together, like from both a player and a character perspective. Um, you know, so I really enjoyed that particular encounter. From a DM standpoint, because said player and characters, worked really well together, and everybody had fun with it.
Well, yeah, it also illustrates the fact that even though maybe you didn't intentionally set it up that way to begin with, that there was other ways for the players to make that a dynamic combat,
Hmm.
beyond the scope of what the DM anticipated. And kind of the DM, you kind of lay it out and be like, well, if you guys screw up, not only do you have to deal with this juvenile yeti, you have to deal with this white dragon that's going to breathe on you and probably kill you. So you put the fear of the white dragon into them, and it got them thinking. So, by doing that, you're able to then have the players interject a role playing scene into the middle of your combat scene, and also maybe like a little bit of a skill challenge, between having to convince the dragon and getting it free, and then
Yep.
having it as an ally. So, it's a great example of cool things that you can do with you know with your combats that aren't just slog fests and beating something up and just throwing more hit points at it.
So from a design standpoint, uh, I I'm like, all right, if they don't see the dragon as something that could be converted to their side, they can either like I put it in a large enough room that they were going to be able to outdistance the dragon, so the dragon would not be able to breathe on them, and they could have a whole fight scene with the ogre or the Yeti over here, off to this side. They could try to lure the Yeti out and fight it outside the reach of the dragon. So in both cases, it's a group on one, and then when they go to deal with the dragon, they could either then talk to it or just beat it down as well. However they chose to do so. But the conversing with it was the ideal situation, because then they get to add a whole nother attack sequence in, and it didn't do a whole crap ton of damage to said Yeti,
Yeah.
because like it started off with a frost, a breath weapon attack, which the Yeti passed his con saving throw. Big shocker. Um, so like it did 10 damage, like whoop de flip and do, but a DC 15 con save and 5d8 damage, like if that hit multiple characters and they failed their saving throws, that could easily drop, several of them. So like that's something you don't want to take for granted. So like I said, it was just a really fun encounter to run, especially when some of the players had essentially only had a single encounter before, Wednesday's game, because that's, with 15 players, that's all I ran. I ran a single encounter. I took some goblins out of Bombardo's away and took a pirate ship, or brought my ship map and had them, as the guards, because they knew that, you know that they were going to be attacked somehow. Um, so there was no role playing. It was just, oh, move around the battle map and kill goblins. So it was hectic.
So
This time they actually got to do some role playing. They got to encounter some puzzles and challenges.
So we've kind of talked about like different types of terrain you can add into a scenario. We've talked about you know adding in skill challenges and role playing challenges into a scenario. Is there anything else you can think of that might spice up a boss battle or just a battle in
Yeah.
general?
So I am fond of, and I kind of briefly mentioned this, waves, and whether you're treating this as like a layer action, or as, if it's all the same thing, it can be coming from the same source. But having more monsters enter the fray, um, to kind of keep the threat level the same. I mean, you could literally have, like, all right, well, there are 10 of things. So at initiative count 20, whatever has been depleted, you are going to return to the battlefield. And you can literally just kind of like pull them off and put them behind your GM screen if you're using, tokens or minis or what have you. And then you just have them enter in and then be able to, kind of keep the battle going. Because you don't want to have too many things on the battlefield, because then AOE becomes too powerful. If, like, there is just a slog of things that's out there, it's like, yep, I'm gonna hit 32 monsters with my fireball because I can. Um, you know, or the god awful. All right, well, I have to make 32 archer attacks with with my goblins. All right, and that's quite exhausting unless you're using some kind of, um, you know, dice rolling program to kind of calculate. I need to do all of these. Let me know how many are above this number. But if I've got 10 or I've got 12 monsters, and you refresh at every, every round at a certain count, you then have the same amount of dice that you're able to roll every round without it ever, you know, being too much.
I know in some of the encounters that have popped up in my own game, spell effects can also be a lot of fun. Um,
Oh yeah,
you guys, not that long ago, I guess. Well, maybe it is at this point because we only play that game once a month. But when you guys were trying to invade the druids' uh, grove, you had the grove spell cast, which means everything is spike growth, and there's a cloud of fog going on, and some other effects. Oh, and tangle as well. But you guys had like cut down trees and just dropped them into his domain. So like it kind of helped. It gave you guys an area to walk on, but also like it's still like a hazard that people can be knocked off of or fall off of. And then you guys were taking out animated trees, and as they would fall over, and you defeated them, you'd create more like walking space, more walkways for yourselves as well. In the one scenario I described, using the disintegrate spell every round. But if you look, you can find other spells too, where you can kind of just take the effects and use the effects. I remember we were designing an encounter, and you know, at first the idea was it's in like a frozen lake, and we wanted to use undead and skeletons, and initially that's what we're going to do. We're going to use the monster, but instead of doing that, we ended up taking the skeletons, and instead of using the monster, we just created an effect. And we probably ripped like the mechanics right from another spell, where basically they were grasping skeletal hands that you're trying to make your way through, because we were more interested in like the effect and the visual and aesthetics of it than we were in actually having actual skeletons.
Yeah, you can. I mean, undead are especially easy to draw from, because some of them have some really amazing abilities, and like you can have spirits that like are an effect of an area. Like if you look at um Oath of Ancients, no, the not Oath of Ancients,
Ancestral,
what's the and the Path of Ancestral Guardian, barbarian. They when they rage, they're surrounded by spirits. Those spirits have an effect on the battlefield, but they're not a creature that can be targeted. So if a player character can have spirits that have an effect, then DMs certainly can do the same kind of thing as well. So you could take any kind of undead ability that you want to have, and you consider that, oh, well, this is just a lair action, or this is a regional area that, this happens as you're passing through this, swamp or cemetery or wherever that, this, necrotic field is present, and insert, oh, the occasional banshee's wail, or shadow touch, or whatever you feel is necessary, and, to just hit somebody at random, um, and that urges the characters. Shit, we can't stay in this area long, or really bad shit's gonna happen.
But
Uh,
the other side of that too is I would encourage as GMs to also add in ways to counter that or shut
oh
them
yeah,
off, so that it gives you other options or even take control of, right? Like, I think in your We Live on a Boat, there were like arcane cannons that we had to
mm,
deal with during one of the combats. But I think also some of the players tried to use them as well, right? So like, you know, it's as a GM, it's cool to put that stuff in there to add an extra level of challenge for your players, but it's also fun to put them in there as things for the players to play with and have the ability to then turn around and be like, "Ah, I'm using your own thing against you," and they get to feel really good about themselves. But I feel like the more clever GM or fun GM would anticipate that and be like, "Yes, I'm putting this in here because I know this is going to make my players happy in order to be able to do this."
and that's what it's there for. Like, and at the end of the day, I want my players to have fun. When you game, I want you to walk away with a story. I want you to be relishing the next session because you had so much fun at the last. Uh, and for me, I know I've been talking about DM burnout and what have you, but I had a great time at a castle. I had a great time, with my my game running for the scouts the last couple days ago, uh, but up until recently, I said, the only game I currently have running is the kids game, and one of my players from that game has actually, you know, kind of temporarily given me the boot. So not that he's unhappy with the game or anything, but he's really passionate about an idea that he's been working on probably for months at this point in time. And we had our first session 2 days ago. Uh, and we had a fairly fun boss fight as well, where like through observation we saw in this, because this is entirely a Candyland kind of style themed game, utterly ridiculous. Like we've got people that are cookies and people that are like animated soda bottles and gummy people. It's utterly hysterical, utter nonsense, and we're all loving it. We're playing again in a couple of weeks. Uh, but we're fighting this essentially candy golem, and there was some like green vial that was like inside its chest cavity that after it had taken so much damage that we had seen that it was there. And it didn't really seem to be slowing down if you attacked anywhere other than like this like 15-foot, high up area. So it's like, all right, well, if we tack and can kind of pull that thing out, it actually like stopped the thing from being animate. So we don't know exactly what it is because we literally uh the 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 party had to like or the game had to end as soon as the monster hit zero because people had other places that they needed to be. We were already like running 10 minutes over. Uh, but like it was like a whole, essentially a skill challenge in addition because it was, perception to notice and it was like a kind of strength to get it out of it. Uh, that wasn't like an attack roll, but it was a cool little thing, and I was impressed that you know while the 15-year-old is not exactly new to DMing, it's the first time I had been a player in their game, so it's cool to see that level of thinking from someone so young.
Well, I feel like sometimes younger people actually have more creative ideas, and you also may be less mired by the rules as well.
Sure,
I mean, especially if you think back to like when we first started gaming, not together but individually, and
sure.
what even were the rules then, right? Like we just like made shit up for the most part.
Uh,
We
I
played
I
something.
unfortunately I remember my early days where it was far more narrative, um, and I was not exactly comfortable enough behind the DM chair to use the rules, so it was people running rookshot all over me.
Well,
So
yeah, I was speaking more to like when I remember when we first started playing, like first of all it was like first edition. You started in second, I believe, and
yeah,
pretty much everyone always changed the rules and just kind of changed so much of them, and also we're all new to the game, so we didn't even know most of the rules, and we're just kind of like making it up as we went along. But
well, I mean that's that is certainly a style. Uh, I can recall an afternoon where I had the living room to myself and a couple of older kids had come over. I don't even remember who. And, like there was this dungeon, if you will, and like when I put a dragon in there, it was like, oh well, I run up to it and cut its head off. Like there were no attack rolls, there were no um, you know, like it was just a narration. Like I don't remember things before that, and I don't remember how I got from that to actually doing the rules properly. But like I can still recall that afternoon and be like, all right, well, I clearly don't know how to make this game work properly. What do you want from me? I'm 13.
you're 13. Well, I know, like now, like you talk about the 15-year-old that's running your games. They just have so many more resources at their
Sure,
disposal. They just go on YouTube or Google and search things. Back then, all we
sure,
had
and
was each other and the rule books. So
and I'm
it's a
not
different
and
time.
I'm not trying to like toot my own horn here, but like we got into a conversation because this 15-year-old was also one who volunteered to come be one of my GMs for the scouts, and someone had asked him like how long the two of us had been gaming together, and I'm like, it's been a few years, and he's like, no, it's a lot longer than that. So like we did the math, and like he's been gaming with me for over 5 years, and I'm like, wow, that's a long time. So, I mean, it could be that he's learning from somebody else. It could be that he's learned from all the games that I've run at the table. It could be, the games that he's played with his father or other people.
Well,
So he's
there's
been he's been playing a long time.
there's an advantage to learning anything from someone that's more experienced, right?
Hmm.
But like, unfortunately, like when we were kids, like we were all roughly around the same age. I feel like, and kind of learning together. So we all
Right.
suck. So all we can really do is teach each other how to suck more.
Well, it's one of those things of that's why I enjoy gaming, with so many people, and you and I feel are completely blessed to have as many different gaming groups as we do. Um, it's why I enjoy, watching streams, so that I can see things that I want to do or not want to do. I've while I'm competent in the skills that I had, but when I started Nerdarchy, I feel like I have learned as a GM ever so much more because by doing this, it is, broadened my horizons in so many ways because of all the different people I've met and seen and gamed with and what have you.
No, I mean you're absolutely right. It is definitely hastened our knowledge, and I also like I think our group has always been pretty open to uh, learning and taking in new experiences, and thankfully we are all blessed enough to not be like so locked in our ways and be like, no, this is
Right.
how you do it. Get off my lawn. Where's my pants? Kind of thing. Uh, so we keep learning and growing, and every time we encounter new things, it's like, oh, this is something I can steal from my game. This is something cool. So with that, it is 9:01, so we were just past, and
So we'll be back on Tuesday for Wormhole. And it has been decided that August 4th is going to be the next game. Sadly, scheduling conflicts in July have just not made it happen. So it's possible that we might get two sessions in August. For did I say October?
you said
August
August.
4th is the next game for Old Guard, with the whole bunch of old adventurers and the mighty Robin at the DM's helm. But we might get two games in August if I can, see if the last weekend in August people are free. We'll see. We'll see what winds up happening there. There'll probably be some little bit of shenanigans with the Sunday while some people are at Gen Con. So Dave and I will probably not be here for that in 2 weeks
Oh
or
yeah,
one
that's
week, whatever it
happening.
is.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
two
So,
weeks.
so
So
but we'll be back after that. We always come back. We're like a bad penny. You can't get rid of us. So until next time, stay nerdy.
stay nerdy.